Hey everyone. Looks like we're taking a deep dive into audits today. We've got a ton of info to unpack, getting ready for the big audit, huh? But honestly, going through all this stuff, one thing really surprised me. Did you know that sometimes external audits can be less frequent than internal ones? Yeah, kind of makes you think. Maybe keeping things in order on the inside is even more important than worrying about the outside, right?
Yeah, for sure. You've got to keep your own house in order first, right? And that's the thing about internal and external audits. Both are super important, but they're different beasts. Internal audits are like going to the doctor for a checkup, making sure everything's running smoothly, catching things early, all about continuous improvement.
Yeah, but we all know how it goes. Sometimes we skip those checkups, and those little things, they can turn into big problems later.
Exactly. That's where internal audits come in. They help you catch those small issues before they become major headaches. It's about preventing those big problems. So internal audits are like taking your car in for regular maintenance. Oil changes, tire rotations, all that. Not the most exciting thing, but it keeps things running smoothly.
I like that analogy. Now, external audits, those are different. It's like a serious inspection. Someone's making sure you're playing by all the rules, all those laws and regulations. The stakes are definitely higher.
Okay, so internal audits are preventative care. External audits are like passing inspection to make sure your car is roadworthy.
Got it.
So how do we ace those internal audits? What's the prep work look like? It can't be just about making the office look tidy, right?
Oh, definitely not. First things first, your policies and procedures. Got to make sure those are up to date. And they need to actually reflect how you do things. Think of them as the instruction manual for your compliance program.
Right, because if your manual says one thing and you're doing something completely different, well, that's going to raise some red flags.
For sure. Auditors want to see that you've got those guidelines and that you're following them. This is where a self-assessment is super helpful. It's like taking a step back, honestly evaluating how you're doing with your compliance, your documents, your training, everything.
So like a practice run before the real deal. Figure out where we might trip up.
Exactly. And speaking of tripping up, internal audits often focus on your documents. Can you find all those contracts, financial records, compliance reports, all that stuff?
Because sometimes, let's be real, finding the right document can feel like searching for a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, and that can definitely be a problem during an audit, having a good system for your
Yeah.
documents, where you can find things easily. It not only makes the audit smoother,
Yeah.
but it shows you're taking things seriously.
Right, like showing up prepared for a meeting makes a good impression. But speaking of preparation, it would be helpful to know what the internal audit team is going to focus on, right? Like, what are they really looking at?
Absolutely. Understanding the scope of the audit helps a lot. It lets you know what they're interested in. They're likely going to be looking at things like financial records, risk management, data protection, regulatory compliance, all those important areas.
It makes sense. Like studying for a test, if you know what's going to be on it, you can focus your energy. But it's not just about the paperwork, right? What about the people involved?
Oh, that's huge. Your team is at the heart of it all. You need to make sure everyone understands the process and that they're prepared. Maybe some refresher training or even mock interviews to help them feel comfortable answering questions.
Right, because nobody wants to freeze up when an auditor asks them something.
Exactly. When your team is prepared, it shows a culture of compliance. And that's a big plus. It
Yeah.
just makes the whole experience smoother.
So we've talked about getting those policies and procedures in shape, organizing our documents, and prepping our team. Internal audits might not sound super fun, but it seems like we've got a good plan. Now, how does this compare to getting ready for an external audit? That's got to feel like stepping into the big leagues, right?
It definitely does. And that's actually a perfect place to pick up after a quick break. We'll dive into external audits when we come back.
Sounds good. We'll be right back after this. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2024-12-21, part 2 of 3.
All right, we're back, ready to tackle those external audits, the ones that can feel like a pop quiz, where you have no idea what's coming. But I'm sure with the right prep, we can still ace it, right?
Absolutely. But yeah, external audits, they definitely bring a whole new level of intensity. One of the biggest differences is the scope. It can be all over the place. Are we talking a financial audit, regulatory audit, operational audit? They each have their own set of rules and expectations.
So it's like internal audits. That's about making sure you're following your own rules. But external audits, that's about proving you're playing by the league's rules. Exactly. And knowing those regulations and standards, the ones those auditors are focused on, that's super important. Are we talking about Sarbanes-Oxley, GDPR, ISO standards? Each one has a whole book of requirements. And you got to make sure you're in line.
Okay, so no winging it here. We need to know those regulations inside and out. What's next?
This is where it gets really interesting. Next comes something called a gap analysis. You're basically taking a magnifying glass to your entire compliance program, looking for any cracks or vulnerabilities, any areas where what you're doing doesn't match up with those external standards.
So it's like a vulnerability scan for your compliance, finding the weak spots before the auditors do.
Exactly. And it's even more important if those laws or standards have changed recently. Things move so fast these days. Finding and fixing those gaps ahead of time, that can save you from some nasty surprises during the actual audit.
I can see how that would be a good thing. Anything else to think about during this prep phase?
This is where your legal and financial teams become your MVPs. They can offer some really valuable insights into the specific regulatory issues that might come up. They can also make sure all your financial records, contracts, all those important documents are good to go from a compliance perspective.
So we're assembling the dream team, making sure we got all our bases covered. We've got our compliance playbook, we've done our vulnerability scan, and our legal and financial experts are ready to go. What happens when the auditors actually show up? Any tips for handling that moment?
Well, first things first, remember that auditors are people too. They're not there to make your life difficult. They're there to assess your compliance program. So approach the whole thing with transparency and collaboration.
Okay, so treat it like a conversation, not an interrogation.
Exactly.
But what if they do find something that's not quite right? How should we handle that?
Honesty is always the best policy. If there's an issue, an area of non-compliance, address it head on. Work with the auditors, explain the situation, provide context, and outline your plan to fix it. Trying to hide things or downplay issues, that will only make things worse.
Got it. Be upfront, be honest, and have a plan to fix any problems. That sounds a lot less scary than I thought.
It really doesn't have to be a painful experience. In fact, audits can be really valuable learning opportunities. You can think of the audit report as a feedback report. It highlights what you're doing well and shows you where you can improve.
Oh, okay, so we're shifting our mindset from audit equals scary test to audit equals valuable feedback. I like that. Now, we can't talk about audits these days without talking about technology. It seems like everything is going digital, and I'm guessing audits are no exception.
You're absolutely right. Technology is changing everything about audits, from how auditors collect and analyze data to how they interact with organizations.
So we're talking data analytics, automation, cloud platforms, all those buzzwords.
Exactly. Auditors are using data analytics more and more to go through tons of information, identify patterns, and assess risk much more efficiently. It's like they have a superpowered magnifying glass for compliance. They can spot those tiny inconsistencies or red flags that might have been missed before.
That sounds impressive and maybe a little intimidating. So does that mean we need to become data experts just to get ready for an audit?
Not necessarily, but you do need to make sure your data is accurate and
Yeah.
complete and easy to access. Auditors are going to expect you to provide them with the data they need in a format they can use.
So no more shoe boxes full of receipts or filing cabinets overflowing with paper. We need to step up our digital game.
Definitely. And it's not just about keeping the auditors happy. Using technology can actually make your compliance efforts a lot more efficient and effective.
All right, so we've talked about the unique challenges of external audits and the growing role of technology. I have to say, this is all starting to make a lot more sense.
I'm glad to hear it. And, speaking of making sense of things, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something that often gets overlooked: the psychology of audits.
Ooh, getting inside the minds of auditors. What do we need to know?
Well, remember that auditors are trained to look for evidence that backs up your compliance claims. They want to see a clear trail of documentation, processes, and procedures that align with the regulations and standards.
So it's not enough to just say we're compliant. We have to prove it. And that proof is all those policies, procedures, training records, everything we've been talking about.
Exactly. It's like building a solid case for your compliance program. You need to back up everything you say with clear and convincing evidence. And that's something we can dig into a little deeper. After a quick break, hashtag TTS, the Deep Dive episode 2024-1221, part 3 of 3.
All right, we're back. Ready to wrap up our deep dive into audits. We've talked about getting ready for those internal and external audits, understanding how technology plays a role, even trying to get inside the minds of auditors. But I'm curious, what happens after the audit is over? Do we just breathe a sigh of relief and move on?
That's a great question. The audit itself is just one part of a bigger picture. The real work starts when you get that audit report, That's when you really dig into the findings and recommendations.
So it's not just about passing the test and moving on.
Definitely not. Think of that report as a roadmap. It shows you where your compliance program is strong, but it also points out areas where you can grow, where you can make things better, streamline some processes.
So it's like getting your report card back in school, but we're actually using the feedback to improve, not just looking at the grades.
Exactly. And just like with a report card, the first step is to understand what it's telling you. You need to look at each finding, make sure you understand the issue, the risks involved, and what they recommend you do about it.
Okay, no skimming allowed. So let's say the report shows some areas where we need to make changes. Where do we even start? It can feel overwhelming with a long list of recommendations.
I know what you mean. But it's all about breaking it down. This is where you develop a remediation plan, a clear plan for addressing each finding.
So like a blueprint for fixing those compliance gaps.
Yeah, exactly. It should outline the specific actions you're going to take, who's responsible, what the timeline is. It's about making sure nothing falls through the cracks.
So like a project plan, but for compliance.
Exactly. You're setting goals, assigning tasks, and holding yourselves accountable.
But we can't just make changes and hope for the best, right?
Right. You need a way to track your progress, to make sure those changes are actually working, and be able to report back to the people who need to know.
So it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. Ongoing monitoring is really important. It shows you're committed to continuous improvement. It shows that you're not just going through the motions, that you're taking compliance seriously.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. But I feel like there's more to it. Something beyond checklists and plans.
You're right. It's about creating a strong audit culture within your organization.
Audit culture. That sounds interesting. What does that look like?
It's about changing how people think about audits. It's about moving beyond seeing them as a chore or a test to pass. It's about understanding the value of audits.
So instead of fearing audits, we see them as a chance to learn and grow.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where everyone can identify risks, raise concerns, and help come up with solutions.
It's like building a strong team.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. When you have that shared understanding, that collaborative spirit, audits become less about finding fault and more about working together to improve.
So we see auditors as allies, not enemies.
Exactly. And it's not just about a positive audit experience. A strong audit culture can benefit your entire organization. Well, when you value transparency, accountability, ethical behavior, it affects everything you do. It can lead to better decisions, stronger risk management, and a more resilient organization.
So it's much bigger than just checking boxes.
Absolutely.
Well, it looks like we reached the end of our deep dive. We've covered a lot, from the nitty-gritty of prep work to bigger ideas like audit culture and continuous improvement.
We have. And I hope our listeners feel ready to face audits with confidence and to see them as a valuable tool for growth and positive change.
I think we've accomplished that. So to our listeners, remember, audits might not always be fun, but they're a crucial part of building a strong and successful organization. Embrace the challenge, learn from the experience, and always keep striving to improve. Until next time.